relatively straightforward concept. It's not very difficult to understand. It's not got too much of technicalities, except maybe forgetting is slightly more complicated. And there are two or three favorite questions of net that come from here. So we'll sort of try and understand it, right? So memory is basically a process that has three parts of encoding, storage, and retrieval. Right? Encoding is where information is understood, storage is where information is kept, and retrieval is where information is taken out from. Right? So three processes are involved, and there are three components of memory, right? There is sensory memory, short-term memory, long-term memory. Short-term memory has been evolved now to working memory, right? However, in the Atkinson and Shiffrin model, very important names because that's again something that Net will ask you. It's short-term memory. It's not working memory, right? Working memory was a concept given by Batley. We'll come to that, right? But short sensory, short-term, long-term memory are the components of memory, right? So sensory memory is the component which can hold a large amount of information, right? But can hold it for a very small fraction amount of time, right? Barely a second or two. So this is all the memory that is stored through your sensory organs, basically, right? Then you have short-term memory, which has limited capacity, so it can't hold a large amount of information, and it can only hold it for a certain amount of time, which is longer than the sensory memory, right? So it has lesser capacity than sensory memory, but it can hold something for a little bit longer, but not for too long, right? Usually 15 to 20 seconds, sometimes 30 seconds, maybe max, right? Uh, Sometimes it gets trained and then you can hold a larger amount of information, but usually it's a brief duration for a limited amount of information, right? Then you have long-term memory, which can store an unlimited amount of information. We still don't know exactly how much, so we say it's unlimited, infinite, um, and it can hold it for really long, right? So one of the things that they'll tell you about long-term memory is that all of the memory that you ever have, every event, everything that you see is stored in your long-term memory, but it's not accessible to you. So memory is available, which means that it's there somewhere in your brain, but the way to get there has been forgotten, right? So memories are available but not accessible, right? So sensory memory is all the information that comes to your senses, all the incoming stimuli, stays for a brief second max or a fraction of a second. Short-term memory is information that is paid attention to, stays for a little bit longer amount of time, but very limited again. And long-term memory is unlimited amount of information for unlimited amount of time, but not everything is accessible, right? So this is basically what the structure looks like. There is incoming information, that is the stimuli. It comes into your sensory memory, sense organs, right? So a lot of information stays for a fraction of a second. If you pay attention to any of those incoming stimuli, then it moves to your short-term memory, right? In the short-term memory, encoding takes place, right? And it stays for like less than a minute. If it's encoded properly and rehearsed, it will move into your long-term memory, and then it can be retrieved and brought back to your short-term memory for use at a later point in time. If it is not rehearsed, if none of the other mnemonic techniques of holding information in the short-term memory is done, then it will be forgotten and the information will remain unprocessed, right? So this is the stages of memory by Atkinson and Shiffrin, right? So sensory organ memory are processing sensations captured by the sense organs. The capacity is large, so it can hold a lot of information. And to transfer that information to short-term memory, and if you pay attention to your sensory memory, it will move to short-term memory, right? All that information. In the sensory memory, there are two types of major storages. One is the iconic storage and the other is the echoic storage. The iconic storage is like a visual receptor, right? Iconic meaning vision. So icon, think of icon, icon is visual, right? So iconic storage is like a sensory storage for vision. So it holds all the incoming visual information. Um, and it's not stored for too long. Again, it's part of sensory memory, right? This was first studied by a guy called George Sperling. Again, remember this name, very important for net at least, right? Some people have what is known as, what is the term, yeah? This is that term for them, no? People who see something one time and then it gets stored.
Photography memory.
Yeah, photographic memory. Thank you. Right, people who have photographic memory usually have great iconic storages, right? So they are not really paying attention. It's just information is getting stored. So these people usually have visual memory that stays for a longer amount of time, and at that point, it's referred to as eidetic imagery, right? So just remember these terms, very important. So iconic storage, George Sperling, eidetic imagery. Then people have echoic storage, right? Echoic storage, echo or audio, obviously, right, is auditory sensory register, which holds sound for a brief amount of time, right? Now, echoic storage has more capacity than iconic storage. So you can hear sound for slightly longer than uh, you can remember things that you saw. So one of the great examples of this is uh, like if you're walking past somewhere, you see somebody, you look away and then they shout your name, right? Even if you don't hear it, you might hear it after two steps, right? You may not remember what you saw, but you might hear it after two steps, right? It might register later. So that's telling you that information stays in the uh, echoic or the echoic storage for a little bit longer amount of time, right? Now, because sensory information is very rapid, new incoming information covers up old information, right? So right now I told you about echoic storage. Now I'm telling you about something else. So new information has come in and it's covering the older information, right? That's called masking. So masking is basically what a mask does. It covers the older stimuli. So that's what this is. Uh, if selective attention is paid to any specific sensory information, it moves from sensory memory to short-term memory, right? So this is the basic process. Now, short-term memory itself has limited storage, like we've discussed, and it can hold things for a limited amount of time. Uh, so it holds information in terms of mental representation. So either it's visual, phonological, that means sound, semantic, meaning meaning, or motor codes, meaning movement of motor bodies, right? Again, in the short-term memory, also auditory information is held for a little bit longer than all other forms of information. So your phonological aspect is held for a little bit longer amount of time compared to visual, semantic, or motor aspects, right? So therefore, one of the things is if somebody tells you a new word in a different language, right, it's easier to remember the sound of what that word was than to remember what it meant, or to remember what it looked like, or to remember how you're supposed to use your motor cords to speak, right? So I don't know, like in Marathi, when I was in Pune, there was like I still don't know how to pronounce it properly, but there's a certain pronunciation for a particular letter, right? Types, right? I know what it sounds like. The first time I saw it, I couldn't remember what it looked like, right? I still don't know how to like use my motor cords, motor information in my throat to speak that out loud, right? I don't know what it means still, but I remember the sound of it, right? So that's basically telling you that short-term memory, again, audition is much more powerful in terms of its capability stored, right? One of the great studies in this space was done by George Miller. Again, George Sperling for sensory, George Miller for short-term memory. This was where he figured out that the number of items that we can remember is anything 7 plus minus 2, right? So 7 is average. Some people can remember plus 2 of that. Some people can remember minus 2 of that, right? Now, over time, we know that this is not really true. People can remember a lot of stuff if they practice, and if they can improve their short-term memory capabilities. But at that point, this was the general rule. This is general rule also if you don't practice, right? But it's not a law. More information can be stored is if information is chunked into smaller, more meaningful units, right? This is called chunking. So phone numbers, for example, is a classic example of chunking, where you break down the phone number into 334 or 433 or whatever, however you remember it, right? Approximately, short-term memory has a time capacity of 20 seconds, right? 20 to 30 seconds. Some people have less, some people have more. As you get older, it becomes lesser. So all of those things are there, right? Uh, then the concept of working memory was introduced by Badley in the 70s, right? So they said that working memory is slightly more sophisticated than short-term memory. So short-term memory is not as simply as it was put by Atkinson and Sheffrin. The working memory actually works as four organized units which work in conjunction with one another to process information. So the four components were the phonological loop, which is where auditory information is stored. So the auditory information may be stored as symbols, it may be stored as images, it may be stored as just representations of the image. Then you have the visual spatial sketchpad, which is the information that is stored from visual or spatial information, right? So the previous one did not have anything to do with spatial information, right? So again, that was a new thing. Then both phonological loop and visual spatial sketchpad can be active simultaneously, meaning that you can see something and hear and use the two of them in your working memory together, right? Then the third component is very important. It's called the episodic buffer. This is basically like a temporary storage area in your working memory where information from long-term memory is retrieved, information from the things that you paid attention to from your visual spatial sketchpad is retrieved, from your phonological loop are retrieved. All of this is integrated, interpreted, manipulated, and then there is another component known as the central executive, which takes care of what to do with this information, right? Should this new information that has come in be stored? Should this be utilized to do something else? Right? Should this be held for a while before more information comes in that you can take a better decision? So working memory that way is a much more complicated and a more sophisticated sort of idea, right? And research has shown that this is a better conceptualization of how we use our minds, basically. Now, some of the ways in which information can move from short-term memory to long-term memory is by maintenance rehearsal. This is basically repetition of information again and again and again, basically what we call ratta or rote learning. If you remember, if you try and mug something up more than 30 seconds, it will stay for a while. If you want it to remain for longer, then you obviously keep mugging and mugging and mugging and it will stay, right? This is not just for mugging, but for general in life also. If you want to remember someone's name, if you keep repeating it to yourself, you'll remember it better, right? Then there's chunking. This is basically grouping information into smaller units and then remembering it like that, right? This is simple concepts. Uh, so overall, this is what the memory system looks like, right? On your left, you have the environmental input, which affects sensory input sense organs, which go into your sensory memory, right? If it's not paid attention to, it is forgotten. If it is paid attention to, it moves to your short-term memory, where if again it's not paid attention to, it's forgotten. If it's paid attention to and maintained or rehearsed, then it moves to your long-term memory, where it is stored. If you do elaborative rehearsal, it is stored in long-term memory. And then later, if there's more new information that comes in, information from the long term can be retrieved and worked through in the short term or working memory. And in the long term also, if things are not really thought about for a while and there is no linking, no associations, then information is forgotten, right? Um, Now, the third component is the long-term memory, right? This is basically our durable memories, memories that are stored for a long amount of time and can be retrieved at any point, right? So information that is stored and retrieved is long-term memory. Even things that can't be retrieved are technically part of long-term memory, but they are also forgotten, right? Some of the important things that happen in long-term memory is the serial position effect. This is basically where if like a list, if I read out a list to you, right, you are more likely to remember things that are told in the beginning of the list and things that are at the end of the list and not things in the middle of the list, right? So this is the serial position effect, meaning serial number position effect, if you really want to easily remember it. So according to serial number, first few will be remembered, last few will be remembered, middle ones won't be remembered, right? So the idea is that when I tell you that, okay, I'm going to read out a list to you, you're getting prepared to remember things, right? So when you're getting prepared to remember things, you're trying to remember information in your long-term memory. So when I start the list, what you will do is you will rehearse the first few ones that I'm saying, right? First A, B, C, D, E, F, and you remember all of that, you'll rehearse it, and all of that information will move to your long-term memory, right? But as I keep reading the list, when I reach the middle portions, there'll be too much information for you to rehearse. You may not be able to rehearse all of it, right? So all of that information slowly starts to fade and you don't remember it, right? And then when I read the end part of the list, what's happened is that all of that new information, the last part information, is still in your short-term memory because that's the last thing you heard, right? So that also is sort of stored in your short-term memory and moves into your long-term memory because those are the last things that you heard, right? So that's the serial position effect, right? There is the primacy effect, not primary effect, is the primacy effect, where you remember the first few items on a list because the information has transferred from short-term memory to long-term memory and is retrievable. Then the second is the recency effect, which is you remember information that is present towards the end of a list, right? This is because the information is still present in your STM. Most of the middle stuff in the list are forgotten or inaccessible. The other thing is how is all of this memory stored, right? So there are four theories. None of those theories are absolutely correct, but there are theories. So the first one was called clustering. This is basically the idea that all information is remembered in terms of groups, right? So if you talk about cat, dog, fish, ball, bat, then all of these will get grouped in two different groups, right? One is sports and another is animals, right? So that's clustering, basically remembering stuff that are similar in groups, okay? And these groups may not be linked with one another, or they may not be in one is greater or lesser. So you have the animal group, and then there is cat, dog, all of these, and then there's the sports group, then there's bat, ball, whatever, right? So this was the most initial conceptualization of how things are remembered. This was based on the assumption of associationism, right? Which is basically things are linked with one another, but they didn't explicitly express it like that, right? Then the second group of theories that came, they spoke about conceptual hierarchy, saying that we have concepts which are part of larger concepts, which are part of larger concepts. So basically, it was like a classical classification system and dividing things into concepts and categories, right? So if you heard of, say, gold, silver, platinum, iron, lead, copper, aluminium, brass, steel, bronze, ruby, diamond, emerald, sapphire, slate, marble, granite, limestone, if you knew all of these things, right? One of the ways you would organize this is to think of, say, platinum, silver, gold as rare metals, right? These all aluminum, copper, lead, iron being common, and these alloys and precious and masonry or whatever, right? And then dividing these into metals and these into stones, and then these two are metals and stones are both types of minerals, right? Now you may not do it exactly like this, but there would be some system, of classification, right? Or hierarchical system. So in my mind, at least, if I had heard all of this, I would have probably thought of platinum, silver, gold can be sold expensive things, right? Aluminum, copper, lead, I know not very expensive things, but you can still get rich with it, right? Then bronze, steel, brass. So steel, okay, these are more common sort of uh, metals, right? And then I would have organized all of this into one component of metal, right? Um, and then if I heard of sapphire, emerald, diamond, ruby, oh, these are also expensive jewels type of thing, right? But I'm not sure if they are metals or not. So I would not include them in the metals classification, but I would keep them as being expensive stones, and I would link it to them with being rare, right? So they would go in the category of stones. Similarly, limestone, granite, marble, slate, these are not as expensive as diamond and all of that, right? So they'll also go in the category of stones, right? And then if someone told me, oh, metals and stones are both minerals, then I'd create a new category called minerals. So and then minerals can be put in another category saying, oh, minerals are found on the earth, worms are found in earth category, right? And then earth is in solar system. So Venus is also in solar system, Mars is also in the solar system, right? And then solar system is in the Milky Way. Milky Way is a galaxy. Solar system is a galaxy, and so on and on and on and on. You'll have different hierarchies like that, right? So that's basically what the conceptual hierarchy framework was, right? A multi-level classification system. Um, but again, not everyone organizes stuff like that, right? For example, you noticed when I saw diamond, I said diamond is not a metal. I didn't know, right? Like right now, also, I'm very unsure about it, but apparently it's not a metal, right? So then not everyone thinks of properties like that, right? Not everyone thinks of everything in terms of like proper properties and goes here and there, right? So again, there is a confusion. So this was based on the idea of schema, right? Saying that we organize knowledge of objects based on previous experience with objects or events, right? So things that are consistent with our schemas, we'll put it there. So I see diamond, gold, all of these being sold and all of that expensive things. I think, okay, they are put together, must be all metals, right? So that's another way of looking at things, right? The best system we've come up with is this. It's called the nodal understanding or semantic networks, right? Which is basically we have concepts that are linked with one another, and then those concepts are linked with other similar concepts, right? And each one can affect other concepts. So if you think of yellow, or let's say you think of red, right? You might start thinking of other colors like orange, yellow, or green. You might think of, say, a rose. You might think of the sunrise. You might think of sunset. You might think of cherry. You might think of apple. You might think of a fire engine, right? Suppose you think of a fire engine. Then from the fire engine, you may think of an ambulance. You may think of a truck. You may think of a vehicle. You may think of a car. right? You may think of an ambulance, anything, right? And then when you think of ambulance, you may think of a vehicle, you may think of a car, right? You may think back of fire engine, back to red, back to sunrise. So this is basically the best understanding we have of how our memory system is organized, which is based on the idea of association, right? So we have different concepts, and each concept is associated with multiple other concepts, which are linked with multiple other concepts. And when you have one memory that comes to you that is linked to hundreds of others, and depending on the circumstance, the place, the mood you're in, the kind of food you've eaten, and a whole load of things, it will trigger another set of memories, which will trigger another set of memories, which will trigger another set of memories, right? So like take the example of like a breakup, best example for this. You think of something sad, then you listen to sad music. You listen to sad music, it gives you reminders of sad things that happened. Those sad things, then you might think of, oh, some nice things also happened. Then you miss that person, then you think of your relationship with that person, and then you think of love, and then you come back to realize that you broke up, and then you feel sad again, and so on and so on and so on and so on, right? So that's basically how our memory system is supposed to be organized, right? It's organized in this idea of spreading activation within the network. This was given to us by Collins and Loftus, right? Very important, 1975. Usually this question is starting to come more often now. Then long-term memory itself, there are different ways in which memory is organized in the long-term memory, right? So it's basically divided in two types, which are then further divided. There's explicit memory, that is memory we are aware of, information that we can recollect consciously. This is also known as declarative memory because you can declare it, right? And then there is implicit memory. These are memories that we are not aware of, and they affect our behavior, but they can't consciously be recalled, right? So, for instance, like say someone asks you, "Do you know how to use a mouse?" Right? You're like, "Yeah, I know how to use a mouse." How does the mouse work? Like, I don't know, right? And then they might ask, "When was the first time you learned how to use a mouse?" Like, I don't know, but it affects your behavior because you know how to use a mouse, right? So that's implicit memory, saying that it's there in you, it's there, that memory is there, it's affecting your behavior, but you can't remember it, right? So it's also called non-declarative memory, or sometimes also referred to as procedural memory, right? So explicit memory is declarative or conscious memory, memory that can be recalled or declared. Um, so when you're responding to a question, you're usually engaging in explicit memory. This is divided into two types. There is episodic and semantic. Episodic memory is information of episodes, right? Usually that happened to us. So things that happen to us, episodes of those things we remember, right? And we can share. Semantic information is information about facts, general knowledge, schoolwork. So asking like, what is the color of a banana, for example, right? Be yellow. That's not related to you. You have not constructed the banana. You have not created it. You have not done anything for it, right? But that's information that you still have. Whereas if I ask you what happened to you in third grade, did you get bullied or something? And you will be like, yeah, right? What did you eat for lunch yesterday? You can tell me, lunch today. So those are episodic informations, right? Implicit memory is non-declarative or procedural memory. So these are things that don't enter our consciousness, but they affect our behavior, So they help you to perform a specific learned skills or habitual responses. So say riding a bicycle, right? You're riding a bicycle. If someone asks you, at which point did you learn? Right? You'll not have an answer. You know that you learned it at a phase, right? But there was no particular point where it was like, oh, I learned and I didn't learn, right? However, if someone is capable of taking out your entire memory system and plotting it, there'll be one moment in time where you knew how to ride the bicycle absolutely perfectly, right? And still you may not be able to tell, even if you're taken to that moment, you may not be able to tell what happened, right? What information did you store that allowed you to do it so well, right? So these are just implicit things that affect our behavior, but we don't exactly know how to explain it, right? So using the shift stick, meaning the gear in your driving, right? When did you know how to use it perfectly, right? Even today, when there are people who know how to drive, if you ask them, how do you know when to change the gear? I just know. Right? So that's another answer. Some people give you technical answers like, oh, RPM went below 2, 3, whatever, but they're not actually looking at the RPM, they're looking at the road. So that's nonsense. But the thing is that you can't exactly say when you're changing the gear, like it's just a feeling that exists and it's just in your memory system that you just know, right? Same for tying your shoelaces, etc. So why are these procedural memories implicit? Because you don't have to consciously remember the steps every time you perform them. It just becomes very automatic, right? So if you have to explain to someone how to tie a shoelace, very difficult thing to do. Say You take two parts of the lace, you put it to cross it, and then you pull it like that way. You can just show it to them and they can copy what you're doing, right? But you can't explain it. So that's the difference. Same thing with riding a bicycle. You can tell someone how to ride a bicycle, but you can't tell somebody how to ride a bicycle, but you can show them, right? So that's the basic difference. Then you have prospective or retrospective memory, right? Prospective memory is a very interesting space. It's something that is being researched on very extensively now. So prospective memory is to remember to do things in the future. So say, for example, at 8:30 you have a meeting, right? So to remember that 8:30 in the future, I have a particular meeting is prospective memory, right? So in remembering to do things in the future, or maybe say 3 days later, or to do the quiz, for example, for all of you are not doing the quizzes, right? Prospective memory is that to remember that, oh, tomorrow morning I'll do the quiz, right? And then when tomorrow morning comes, you may not remember. So again, that it's not stored well, it's not encoded well, or something has happened and you forgot, right? And retrospective memory is events from the past, remembering things from the past, right? Now there are different types of amnesia that affect either or. We'll get into that. But this is basically how the memory system is, right? There is explicit, implicit, prospective, retrospective.